"No man can last a night with me," Ingrid screamed, her voice cracking as she threw his hat into the dirt. "I've broken 5 husbands before they even touched me. 5! They see these arms, this body I built to survive, and they run." Her chest heaved. Jacob Brennan picked up his hat, dusted it off, and said 6 words that shattered every wall she'd built. "Good. I wasn't planning on running." The dust hung between them like a curtain neither wanted to pull back. Ingrid's hands were still shaking, still curled into fists she'd learned to make at 14, when her father told her she'd never be soft enough for any man to love. The wedding dress felt like a costume now, white lace over shoulders that had hauled fishing nets through North Sea storms, arms that had carried her dying mother up 3 flights of stairs because the doctor wouldn't come for poor people. Jacob didn't move closer, didn't move back, just stood there in the late afternoon sun with his hat in his hands and something in his eyes she couldn't name, because she'd never seen it before. Not pity, not fear, not the hungry look men got when they wanted to break something wild just to prove they could. "You don't know what you're saying," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I wake at 3 in the morning. I work until midnight. I can carry a 100-pound feed sack in each hand, and I don't stop until the work is done. The last man who tried to match me ended up in bed for 3 days with his back thrown out. The one before that left in the night with half my dowry money. And you—" She gestured at him, at his quiet, steady presence that unsettled her more than violence ever had. "You think you're different?" "No," Jacob said, and the honesty in it made her breath catch. "I think I'm exactly the same as you." The words didn't make sense. He was lean where she was broad, quiet where she was storm, contained where she spilled over the edges of everything. But then he held out his hands, palms up, and she saw the calluses that matched her own. The scars across his knuckles from wire and wood, and things that fight back. The way his fingers curved slightly inward, like they'd forgotten how to be empty. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said, and his voice carried the kind of flat that comes after you've screamed yourself hollow. "Sarah, she worked harder than any 3 men I ever met. Got up before dawn, drove herself until she couldn't stand, and I let her because I was doing the same thing. Both of us running from something we couldn't name, working ourselves to death because it felt safer than being still long enough to feel anything." Ingrid's anger started to crack. She didn't want it to. Anger was armor, and she'd needed armor since she was old enough to understand that being big and strong and female meant the world would never let her be anything else. She collapsed in the barn. Jacob continued, and now his hands weren't steady anymore. "Aneurysm. The doctor said she'd probably been dying for months, but she wouldn't slow down long enough to notice the headaches, the dizzy spells. She just kept pushing. And I kept letting her because I didn't know how to ask someone to stop running when I was running just as hard." The sun was lower now, painting everything gold and red, and Ingrid realized she was crying without remembering when that started. "Then why did you answer my advertisement? Why would you want another woman who works herself to death?" "Because," Jacob said, and finally took a step closer, just one. Enough that she could smell leather and sage and something like rain before it falls. "I don't want another woman who works herself to death. I want to learn how to live instead of just survive. And I think maybe you do too, or you wouldn't have written that letter." Ingrid's breath stopped. "What letter?" "The one you wrote but never sent. The one you burned in your landlady's fireplace 3 weeks before you agreed to come here." Her heart was hammering now, hard enough to hurt. "That's impossible. How could you—" "Your landlady is my cousin," Jacob said quietly. "She pulled it from the ashes after you left. Couldn't read most of it, but she read enough. Read about a woman who was tired of being strong, who wanted just once to be held like she wasn't made of stone, who was terrified that she'd crossed an ocean just to find out she was still too much for anyone to want." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked the same way hers had. "My Sarah wrote a letter like that once. I found it after she died, and I swore if I ever got another chance, I wouldn't waste it trying to prove anything. I'd just try to understand." The ranch was quiet, except for the wind moving through the grass and the distant sound of cattle settling for the evening. Ingrid stood there in her wedding dress, with mascara probably running down her face and her fists finally unclenching. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything except what I've always been." "Neither do I," Jacob said. "But maybe we figure it out together. Not by seeing who can last longer or work harder, just by showing up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He held out his hand. "Not demanding, not expecting, just offering." Ingrid looked at it for a long moment, that work-scarred hand that looked so much like her own, and thought about all the hands she'd refused to take, because taking them felt like surrender. But maybe, for the first time, surrender wasn't the right word. Maybe the right word was trust. She reached out. Their fingers touched, and neither of them pulled away. The barn smelled like hay and leather, and the kind of honest sweat that comes from work, not fear. Ingrid stood in the doorway at 4 in the morning, surprised to find the lanterns already lit. She'd woken at 3 out of habit. That old reflex to get started before anyone could accuse her of laziness, before anyone could say she wasn't pulling her weight. But the house had been empty when she came downstairs. She found him in the 3rd stall, knee-deep in straw, mucking out the mess from the horses. His shirt was already soaked through, his hat hanging on a post, and he worked with the kind of rhythm that said he'd been at it for a while. An hour, maybe more. He looked up when her shadow fell across the stable floor, and there was no surprise in his face. Just a small nod, like he'd been expecting her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, and hated how uncertain she sounded. Yesterday's breakthrough felt fragile in the pre-dawn darkness, like maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. "Haven't slept past 3 in 2 years, Jacob said, driving the pitchfork into another pile. "Figured I'd get a start on things. Coffee's hot in the house if you want it. I can handle this." And there it was, the test she'd been waiting for, the gentle dismissal, the "I've got this, little lady," that always came eventually, even from men who claimed to be different. She felt her spine straighten, felt her hands curl, felt every wall she'd lowered yesterday start climbing back into place. "I can work," she said. And her voice had that edge again, that dare. Jacob stopped, looked at her fully, and she watched something cross his face, something that looked like recognition and regret mixed together. "That's not what I meant. It never is. Ingrid, I'm not fragile," she cut him off. "I'm not decorative. I'm not here to pour coffee and smile while you do everything. That's not who I am. That's never who I'll be." "I know." His voice was quiet but steady. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm just saying the horses need feeding, the water trough has ice that needs breaking, and there's a fence down in the north pasture. If we split it up, we finish by breakfast. If we both try to do everything, we're still working at sunset and somebody gets hurt." He paused, and his eyes held hers. "I'm not trying to protect you from work. I'm trying to work with you instead of against you." The words were so simple they felt like a trick. Ingrid had spent 28 years preparing for battle, and he kept refusing to fight her. It was disorienting, like learning to walk on ground that shifted under your feet. "The fence," she said finally. "I'll take the fence. You finish here and meet me with the wire and posts." Something like relief crossed his face. "A deal." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Jacob? Yeah? Why didn't you tell me yesterday? About being up before me? You could have made a point of it. Could have proven you can match me." He leaned on the pitchfork, and in the lantern light, he looked older than his 32 years, like he'd lived several lives already. "Because this isn't a competition. It's a marriage. And Sarah and I turned it into a competition without meaning to. Every morning became a race to see who could get up first. Every task became a challenge. We were so busy trying to prove we didn't need each other that we forgot we wanted each other." His voice went rough. "I won't make that mistake twice." Ingrid felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen since her father died and left her alone in a country that didn't want women who took up space. She wanted to say something profound, something that matched the weight of what he'd given her. But all that came out was, "The north pasture fence is going to need at least 20 posts, maybe 30. It's bad out there." "Then I'll bring 40, Jacob said. "And I'll bring the mallet. Your hands are bigger than mine. You'll get better leverage on the post driver. It was such a small thing, admitting she might be better at something. But small things were how you built trust, post by post, day by day. She nodded and left before he could see her smile. The north pasture was worse than she'd thought. Not just down, but destroyed, like something heavy had crashed through it in the night. Deer, maybe, or cattle spooked by coyotes. 3 full sections needed complete rebuilding. She was on her second post, fighting frozen ground that didn't want to give, when Jacob arrived with the supply wagon. He didn't comment on how far she'd already gotten. Didn't praise her like she was a child who needed encouragement. Just handed her a canteen of coffee, still hot, and started unloading wire without a word. They worked in silence for an hour, the only sounds the ring of the post driver and the screech of wire being stretched tight. "You're using the wrong grip," Jacob said finally. When she struggled with a particularly stubborn staple, Ingrid's shoulders tensed. Here it comes, she thought. The correction, the condescension, the implication that she's doing it wrong because she's a woman, but he didn't tell her. He showed her. Game over, positioned his own hands on a spare piece of wire, demonstrated the angle. It's counterintuitive. You think you need to push straight down, but the staple wants to go in at a slant. Less force, better angle. Sarah taught me that after I spent 3 hours doing it the hard way. Sarah. He kept mentioning her without flinching, without making Ingrid feel like she was competing with a ghost. Instead, it felt like he was introducing them, like saying, "Here's what I learned from someone I loved. Maybe it helps you too." "Show me again," Ingrid said quietly. He did. And this time when she tried it, the staple sank clean and true. Something loosened in her shoulders, some old knot of having to figure everything out alone. "Thank you." "You would have gotten it," Jacob said, already moving to the next post. "But why waste time when I can show you in 30 seconds? They worked through sunrise, through the morning heat, through the part of the day when the sun made everything shimmer and the sweat ran down your back in rivers. Ingrid kept waiting for him to flag, to slow down, to prove that men couldn't actually match her pace. But he didn't. He worked steady and smart, conserving energy instead of burning it, taking water breaks without apology, and expecting her to do the same. "Break!" he called around noon, and she started to protest until she realized her hands were cramping and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. They sat in the wagon's shadow, passing the canteen back and forth, and she noticed he'd packed bread and cheese and apples without making a show of it. "You're not what I expected," she said between bites. "Neither are you. I'm exactly what I advertised. Strong, difficult, too much. You're scared," Jacob said, and it wasn't mean, just observed. "That's not the same as difficult," Ingrid wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Every wall, every test, every moment of pushing people away before they could leave, it was all just fear, wearing a different coat. "After my father died," she heard herself say, "I had to become him. Had to be strong enough for my mother and my sisters and myself. Had to be harder than the men who thought we'd be easy targets. And after a while I forgot how to be anything else. Forgot there was anything else worth being." Jacob didn't touch her, but he shifted closer, close enough that their shoulders almost met. "My father told me real men don't cry. Don't break. Don't need anybody. So when Sarah died, I worked. Worked until my hands bled. Worked until I couldn't think. Worked until I was pretty sure I'd work myself right into the grave with her." He looked at his scarred palms. "Took my cousin shaking me half to death to make me understand I wasn't honoring Sarah's memory. I was copying her mistakes. And now I'm trying something different. Trying to build a life instead of just surviving one." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were clear and honest and terrifying in their openness. "But I can't do it alone. And I don't think you can either." The fence stretched out before them, half finished. There was still so much work to do. So many posts to drive, so many wires to string. But for the first time in her life, Ingrid didn't feel buried by the weight of it. She felt something she'd forgotten existed. She felt like she had a partner. "Come on," she said, standing and brushing off her skirt. "Fence won't build itself." Jacob smiled and it changed his whole face. "No, ma'am, it won't. They worked until sunset, and when the last post was driven and the last wire pulled taut, Ingrid stood back and looked at what they'd built together. It was solid. It was straight. It would hold, just like maybe finally she was starting to. The nightmare came the way it always did, sudden and violent and so real Ingrid could smell the smoke. She was 14 again, watching the fishing boat capsize in the storm, watching her father disappear under black water while she stood on the dock, frozen, useless, too weak to save him. She heard herself screaming his name, felt her lungs burning, felt hands grabbing her shoulders, and she swung without thinking, hard and fast. The way you swing when you're fighting for your life. Her fist connected with something solid, and she heard a grunt of pain. Her eyes snapped open. She wasn't on a dock. She was in bed in the ranch house, and Jacob was on the floor holding his jaw, blood trickling from his lip. Oh, God! Ingrid scrambled out of bed, her heart still hammering. Oh, God, Jacob, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I was dreaming, and I thought, it's okay. His voice was strained but steady. He worked his jaw carefully, testing. It's okay. You were having a nightmare. I tried to wake you and I should have known better than to touch you without warning, but it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. She'd hit him. She'd hurt him. She was exactly what every man before him had feared, exactly what her father had warned her about before he died. Too strong, too violent, too dangerous to be around. I need to go, she said, already looking for her boots, her coat, any excuse to run before he could tell her to leave. I need to check the horses. I need to— Ingrid, stop. I can't stop. Don't you understand? This is what I do. This is what I am. I hurt people. I break things. You should have listened to those other men. You should have— Ingrid. He was standing now, moving toward her slowly, hands visible, and there was blood on his chin, but no fear in his eyes. Look at me, please. She didn't want to. Didn't want to see the disappointment or the anger or worse, the pity. But something in his voice made her stop moving, made her turn. And what she saw in his face wasn't any of the things she'd expected. It was understanding. I have nightmares too, Jacob said quietly. About the fire. About watching Sarah collapse and not getting to her fast enough. About holding her while she died and feeling so helpless I wanted to die right along with her. He touched his bleeding lip, winced slightly. 2 months after she passed, I punched a hole through the barn wall because I couldn't punch the god that took her from me. Broke 3 knuckles. Doctor said I was lucky I didn't lose the hand. Ingrid's breathing was starting to slow, but her hands were still shaking. That's different. You were alone. You didn't hurt anyone else. I hurt myself. That counts. He moved closer, still careful, still giving her space to bolt if she needed it. And I hurt the memory of every good day we had together by turning myself into something angry and bitter and half dead. Sarah would have hated what I became, just like I think your father would hate knowing you're still trying to save him by drowning yourself. The words hit like a slap, sharp and true and unbearable. You don't know anything about my father. I know he died and left you holding a weight no 14-year-old should carry. I know you've been trying to be strong enough for 2 people ever since. I know you wake up fighting because some part of you is still standing on that dock, trying to pull him out of the water. Jacob's voice was gentle but unflinching. And I know that hitting me just now scared you more than it hurt me because you're terrified you're going to turn into the kind of person who hurts people. But Ingrid, you already are that person. We both are. Everyone is. The question isn't whether we can hurt each other. It's what we do after. She wanted to argue, wanted to put her walls back up, wanted to run out into the darkness and keep running until she was too tired to feel anything. But her legs wouldn't move. Her walls wouldn't rebuild. And somewhere under the panic and the shame, she realized she was tired. So tired. Tired of running. Tired of fighting. Tired of being strong every single second because the moment she stopped, someone would see her as weak. I don't know what to do, she whispered, and her voice broke on the words. I don't know how to be the kind of person someone can love without being afraid of. You let them be afraid, Jacob said simply. You let them see the scary parts and trust that they'll stay anyway. You let them hit you in their sleep, and you forgive them. You let them see you cry. You let them fail. You let them be human. He paused, and something raw crossed his face. I never let Sarah see me be weak. Never let her know I was scared of losing the ranch. Scared I wasn't good enough. Scared that one day she'd realize she'd married a coward. So she never told me she was scared either. We were both so busy being strong that we forgot how to be real. And now she's gone, and I can't ever tell her I was scared too. That I needed her as much as she needed me. That she didn't have to be invincible. Ingrid felt tears sliding down her face and didn't bother wiping them away. I'm scared all the time. Every single day. Scared I'm too much. Scared I'm not enough. Scared that if I stop moving, stop working, stop proving myself, someone will finally see that I'm just a girl who couldn't save her father and has been pretending to be strong ever since. I know, Jacob said, and his own eyes were wet now. I can see it. I've seen it from the moment you stepped off that train. You were terrified, and you're still terrified, and that's okay. You don't have to stop being scared. You just have to stop being scared alone. The words cracked something open inside her, something that had been locked tight since she was 14 years old and learned that grief had no bottom and strength had no end. She made a sound that was half sob, half gasp, and then she was moving toward him without deciding to. And his arms were around her and she was crying into his shoulder the way she'd never let herself cry. Not at her father's funeral, not when her mother died 6 months later, not through any of the 1,000 small deaths that came from being too much and not enough all at once. Jacob held her and didn't try to shush her or fix her or make it better. He just held on, and when her legs gave out from exhaustion and grief and relief, he guided them both to the floor and kept holding her, his back against the bed frame, her weight against his chest. And he let her break apart without trying to put her back together. I'm sorry, she said when she could finally speak, her voice wrecked and raw. I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I'm like this. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing for being human, Jacob said, and there was something fierce in his voice now. You're not a machine. You're not a beast. You're not a thing that exists to be useful. You're a person who's been hurt and scared and alone, and you're allowed to be all of those things without apologizing for taking up space. Ingrid pulled back enough to look at his face, at the bruise already forming on his jaw, at the dried blood on his lip, at the tears on his cheeks that he didn't bother hiding. How do you do that? How do you make it sound so simple? It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. But I'd rather fail at being honest with you than succeed at pretending everything's fine. He reached up carefully, telegraphing the movement, and pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. My whole marriage with Sarah was both of us pretending. Pretending we were fine. Pretending we didn't need help. Pretending right up until the moment she died in my arms, and I realized we'd wasted years of being real with each other because we were too proud or too scared or too something. I don't want to waste time, Ingrid said, and meant it with everything she had. Then don't be scared. Be angry. Have nightmares. Hit me if you have to, though maybe warn me first so I can block. He smiled slightly, and it hurt his split lip, but he didn't stop. Just be here, be real. That's all I'm asking. They sat there on the floor as the sun started to rise outside, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, and Ingrid felt something shift inside her. Not fixed, not healed, but different. Like maybe healing wasn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it was about finally letting someone see who you'd been all along. I dream about him every night, she said quietly. My father. I'm always trying to reach him and I'm never fast enough, never strong enough. And I wake up feeling like if I'd just been a little bit more, a little bit better, he'd still be alive. That's not how drowning works, Jacob said gently. That's not how any of it works. You were a child. It wasn't your job to save him. It was his job to save you. The words were so obvious and so impossible to believe that Ingrid almost laughed. Then why do I still feel like I failed him? Because grief doesn't care about logic, and trauma doesn't care about the truth. They just care about surviving. And sometimes surviving looks like blaming yourself, because that feels more. controllable than admitting random terrible things happen, and we can't stop them. Ingrid leaned her head back against his shoulder and felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, felt the way his arms stayed loose around her, holding without trapping, supporting without smothering. Your wife was lucky to have you. No, she wasn't. I failed her in every way that mattered. I just hope I get the chance to do better with you. You already are, Ingrid said, and realized she meant it. You already are. They stayed there until full daylight, until the cold floor made their joints ache and the ranch demanded attention. But when they finally stood and started their day, something had changed. Ingrid still woke up ready to fight, but now she had someone who'd fight alongside her instead of against her, and that made all the difference. 3 months later, Ingrid woke to find Jacob's side of the bed empty. For a moment, the old panic tried to rise. He's left. He's realized he's gone. But then she smelled coffee and heard the sound of him moving around downstairs, and the panic dissolved into something else, something that felt dangerously close to peace. She found him at the kitchen table with 2 cups already poured, watching the sun come up through the window. He looked up when she came in, and the smile that crossed his face was the kind that still made her breath catch. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. You slept past 4, he said, and there was no judgment in it, just observation. That's 3 days in a row now. Are you keeping track? She took the cup he offered, their fingers brushing in a way that still sent electricity up her arm. I'm celebrating. He gestured to the window, to the ranch beyond it, that they'd spent months rebuilding together. You're sleeping. Actually sleeping. That's worth tracking. Ingrid sat down across from him and realized he was right. The nightmares still came, but less often now. And when they did, she didn't wake up swinging anymore. She woke up reaching, and Jacob was always there to reach back. Before we continue, if you're finding this story moving, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our community spans the whole world. Just like Ingrid's journey did. The Hendersons are coming by today, Jacob said, pulling her back to the moment. Want to see the new foal? And probably to see if you've killed me yet. Ingrid laughed, and the sound still surprised her. She laughed now. Actually laughed. Let me guess. They're taking bets in town on how long you'll last. Oh, the bets are already settled. You're stuck with me? He reached across the table, took her hand. Question is whether you're okay with that. She looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused from work, hers the same, both of them marked by survival, but no longer defined by it. 3 months ago, she would have pulled away, would have made some comment about not needing anyone. Now she just squeezed back. I'm more than okay with it, she said quietly. I'm terrified by it. But I'm okay with being terrified as long as you're terrified with me. Deal. He stood, pulled her up with him. Come on. I want to show you something before the Hendersons get here. They walked out to the north pasture, the one they'd repaired together that first week. And Ingrid saw what he meant immediately. The fence was still standing, strong and true, but something new had been added. A small gate beautifully crafted, with words burned into the wood above it. Sarah's garden, she read aloud, and looked at Jacob with questions in her eyes. I never made her a grave marker, Jacob said, and his voice was steady but soft. Never knew what to say, how to sum up a whole person in a few words. But last week, I realized I didn't need to sum her up. I just needed to remember her. So I made this, a place to grow things. A place that lives, instead of just marks where something died. Ingrid felt her throat tighten. It's beautiful. I want you to help me plant it, Jacob said. Not because you have to, not because you're replacing her, but because you're part of this life now. And I think Sarah would have liked you. I think she would have understood you. And I think she'd be glad I found someone who could see me the way she never quite felt safe enough to. There were so many ways Ingrid could have responded. So many walls she could have put up, so many reasons to make this about competition or comparison or whether she was good enough. But 3 months of learning to be real instead of strong had taught her something. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was just accept love when it was offered. I'd be honored, she said simply. They spent the morning planning the garden, sketching out beds for vegetables and herbs and flowers, talking about what Sarah had loved and what Ingrid wanted to try growing. And somewhere in the middle of discussing tomato varieties and whether roses would survive the winter, Ingrid realized this was what partnership actually looked like. Not grand gestures or constant passion or proving yourself every day. Just showing up, making plans, building something together that neither of you could build alone. The Hendersons arrived around noon, and Ingrid watched the surprise on their faces when Jacob introduced her not as my wife, but as my partner. Watched their eyebrows raise when he asked for her opinion on a stallion they were thinking of buying. Actually asked and actually listened. Watched Mrs. Henderson pull her aside after the men went to look at the foal. "You're different than I expected," the older woman said, and there was appraisal in her eyes, but not judgment. "The stories in town made you sound like some kind of wild thing that needed taming." "I am wild," Ingrid said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Just not the kind that needs taming. The kind that needs space to be wild in." Mrs. Henderson smiled, and it was approving. "Good. Last thing Jacob needed was another woman trying to make herself small to fit into his grief. You being big and loud and unafraid is probably what saved him." "He saved me too," Ingrid said, and realized it was true. "We saved each other." After the Hendersons left, after the dinner dishes were washed and the evening chores done, Ingrid and Jacob sat on the porch watching the sun set over land they were learning to call home. She'd spent so many years thinking home was a place you had to defend, borders you had to guard, walls you had to maintain. Now she was learning home was a person who saw your walls and didn't try to break them down or climb over them. Just stood beside them until you were ready to open the gate yourself. "I got a letter today," Jacob said quietly, "from the Territorial Governor's office. They're looking for couples to help settle the new Western Territories. Good land, support from the government. A chance to build something from the ground up." Ingrid felt her heart skip. "That sounds like opportunity." "It sounds like running," Jacob corrected gently. "And I promised myself I was done running. But if you want to go, if you want to try something new, I'm with you. Whatever you choose." She thought about it, really thought about it. 3 months ago, she would have jumped at the chance. New territory meant new people who didn't know her story, didn't have expectations, didn't whisper about the giant mail-order bride who couldn't keep a husband. But now, sitting here on this porch, on this land they'd bled and sweated and cried over, she realized she didn't want to run any more either. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to plant Sarah's garden. I want to see the fall grow up. I want to build a life here that's ours, not just surviving, but actually living. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay," Jacob said and pulled her close. "That's everything." They sat there as the stars came out, countless and bright and indifferent to human struggle, and Ingrid thought about the girl she'd been when she stepped off that train 3 months ago. So afraid of being broken that she'd spent her whole life being the one who broke first. So convinced no man could last a night with her that she'd never considered maybe the right man wouldn't try to last. "He'd try to stay. I love you," she said, and the words were easier than she'd expected. Not because loving was easy, but because hiding had been so much harder. "I don't know if I'm good at it yet. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of wife people expect. But I love you." Jacob turned to look at her, and in the starlight she could see every scar, every line of grief, every mark of a life lived hard. And she could see something else too, hope. "You're exactly the kind of wife I need. The kind who's honest. The kind who fights for us instead of against me. The kind who's brave enough to be scared and strong enough to be weak." He kissed her forehead, gentle and sure. "And I love you too, not in spite of who you are. Because of it." Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind moved through the grass like water, and the ranch settled into its nightly rhythms. Inside the house, their bed waited. Tomorrow, the work would start again. Fences to mend, animals to tend, a garden to plant, a life to build. But tonight they just sat together, two people who'd been broken by loss and loneliness, learning that maybe, just maybe, you didn't have to be unbreakable to survive. You just had to find someone willing to hold your pieces while you figured out how to put them back together. And when they finally went inside, when they lay down in the darkness with their hands intertwined between them, Ingrid didn't fight sleep, didn't brace for nightmares, just closed her eyes and let herself rest in the knowledge that for the first time in 14 years, she wasn't alone. The woman who'd said no man could last a night with her had finally found the man who wasn't trying to last. He was trying to build a lifetime. And that, she was learning, made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone stand beside you. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, remember that the best love stories aren't about finding someone who completes you. They're about finding someone who sees you're already complete and loves you anyway.